good afternoon, and welcome to everyone who's joining us for today's Fireside Chat, whether that's live or whether you're watching the recording at a later slot. I'm very pleased that this afternoon we've got with us Karla, Peter and Bahar. We've got a number of really interesting perspectives to share. We're going to be talking about all aspects of active travel and where the TTF and its members might have a role to play. And I'm going to start us off by saying to each of our panel, just tell us a bit about what you're up to at the moment that would be of interest to the TTF audience. What are the projects you're working on? What's of relevance to the TTF? And let's start. I'm looking on my screen here. I'm going to start with Bahar. What are you up to at the moment, Bahar?
Good afternoon, everyone. Currently, we are looking at helping governments to adjust to the pandemic condition for the transport, both infrastructure and also promoting, indeed, active travel. And also helping quite some of the existing clients we have with the strategizing of promoting more integrated transportation, how they can make active travel a more permanent solution as we go out of pandemic, and also a lot of technological solutions to promote that and make sure that's a safe and comfortable cycling and active travel in general for all the travelers.
Okay, and is that something, I'm just thinking here, is that something that's a UK initiative? Is that a global initiative?
Briefly said, it's quite a global initiative at the moment. There is a lot of public authorities and cities and the sort of ministries looking to it. But there is also differences in terms of how much they have focused and emphasized on making it to be a real solution, or is it in the terms of like a strategy and policy towards it? But it's quite globally of interest. Europe also quite leading in that.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to come over to Peter now. Peter at Vivacity, what are you up to at the moment?
Thank you very much. So two key things that we're really been focusing on in the last few months, and the first one is around active travel, which is obviously very relevant to this conversation, where our video-based sensors can provide detailed road usage data, not just on the typical modes of transport, but that would be vehicles driving along the road, but also active travel, so your pedestrians and cyclists. And so we've been particularly focusing on supporting local authorities in doing before, during and after studies around various interventions that they're making to encourage and promote active travel, to offer feedback in terms of how those interventions are functioning, not just from an uptake perspective, but from a behaviour impact perspective. So if a pavement has been widened, are the pedestrians then able to walk further apart and social distance better? That's sort of the granularity of data that we're getting out and we're able to then provide through to our clients. So that's been one of the key themes when we're talking directly to clients. The other big piece of research that we're working on at the moment is a project called Smart Junctions that's funded by Innovate UK. I know Karla is very close to that particular project, where we're using a AI approach to extract data from our sensors to be able to optimize traffic flow through a traffic signal junction better. And again, by linking together the video-based sensor that is able to detect those active travel modes, the pedestrians and cyclists, with the AI, it creates opportunities around multimodal optimization, and indeed, hopefully for the first time, seeing a junction that is really able to put some of these active travel modes at the top of the agenda when it comes to optimizing those traffic signals.
So I'm hoping that everyone on the call and everyone observing has just written down multimodal optimization. That's today's phrase. I'm going to come back to you, Peter, a bit later on in the chat to ask whether the junction you've just described exists, whether it's actually been designed, whether it's actually been implemented, because I'm sure a lot of us have heard a great deal about a certain notorious roundabout, and working out how these things work is clearly very important. But you gave a brilliant Radio 4 segue to us there, to leap across to Karla, who's been very busy launching Innovation Nation. But Karla, the world viewed from Innovate UK, what have you guys been up to? What have you been up to that's of interest to the TTF gang?
Okay, so afternoon, everybody. So the main thing that I've been working on in this area is something called combo travel, which is a phrase that came to me during another panel, actually, when it struck me that active travel is very much for people who are fit and healthy, have bikes, and possibly in local regions rather than rural to local. So this concept came about thinking, how can we enable active travel for everybody, regardless of their fitness ability, their economic situation, whether they can afford a bike, whether they're in rural areas, how we get them from rural areas to urban areas. So it's this concept of using active travel and public transport, and then active travel again, for example, so we can get everybody involved in some kind of active travel regardless of their situation. So there's not really been done, we haven't really done any work on this in the UK in the past. So we have teamed together with Scott Kane from Active Things and Glenn Lyons from UE, and they're doing some work for me based on the challenges, what's stopping people from being more actively, from traveling more actively, and what are the opportunities as well, whether it's down to wearables, but the exercise benefits they're going to have, you know, what are all the opportunities that and the benefits that there are from active travel. So we're unpacking an awful lot there to enable everybody to be more active. And
do take the opportunity, do tell us just a bit about Innovation Nation. What's been going on there?
Well, if you've not heard already, Innovation Nation is our new project platform. It's been designed by 42, and it's very much about a hub, if you like, for projects in transport run by anybody, regardless of whether they were funded by Innovate UK, DFT, whoever funded them. So if you want to know who's doing something on mobility as a service, you can go into this database, put MAS in, and it will tell you who's doing what, whether it's open, whether it's closed, what happened as a result, who was involved, and you can contact different people to really get that connectivity and know-how going. So we're very excited that's a new platform that's just being launched at the moment.
Excellent. Okay, well, I'd encourage everyone to go and have a look. That's a live web link. People can go and see all sorts of projects there, all sorts of information, and make contacts, which is, I think, the key thing. So we're here to talk about active travel, and I thought, despite some of the things you've just said in your introductory remarks, I'd put a contentious challenge to you, which is that we all know what we're talking about when we talk about the Transport Technology Forum. We're thinking about the technology of traffic control systems, and we're talking about vehicle to infrastructure, vehicle to vehicle. We're talking about cars, aren't we? Really? Cars, maybe a bit of logistics. So where's the role of the TTF when it comes to active travel, which is me and my two legs, or me and my rarely used bicycle? Let me come to Peter first here. Where does TTF fit into the world of active travel?
Well, firstly, if we're saying TTF as being transport technology, active travel is definitely a mode of transport for getting from A to B. So I don't think there's any debate there about the applicability of the TTF on the transport side of things. From a technology perspective, when we founded the company 5 years ago, fundamentally our objective was to produce technology that would support active travel. And in my introduction, I've already explained these two AI-based products that are sort of packed with really cutting-edge technology that are very much focused on those two modes of transport. But it's not just us that are bringing technology to the active travel space. You've got companies like C-Sense who have connected bike lights that are reporting huge amounts of data that actually add value beyond just the bikes that they're riding in around what's happening on the roads. See the sort of the e-scooter space as well, which are also packed full of technology and are on the active travel side of things. So to say that there's only technology in cars would definitely be a sort of misdirection.
I absolutely get that. But before I leave you, one of the things I'm particularly keen that we bring out in this discussion is when we think about what technology can do for us, we're very often thinking about the information that comes to us as the user. The pedestrian, the cyclist, the driver, whoever. But there's a big role here, I think, for data and for enabling the people making the policy decisions or getting involved in the design decisions to have a far better understanding of what's going on. And I think it's fair to say Vivacity played quite a role in that over the last, 10 months now of the coronavirus response, in looking at our travel patterns, and certainly not just whether fewer of us are driving. Could you tell us a bit about what's been going on that front, Peter?
Yes, absolutely. So we now have sensors in 35 towns and cities around the UK. They are not just looking at the cars, vans and trucks driving along the road, but also the volume of pedestrians and cyclists. And if we rewind back to March, there was a call that came out through the TTF from the DFT for local authority data that would be able to help the central government understand what the impact of various coronavirus lockdowns were on our road networks. Obviously, the DFT already had a number of counting sites for lumps of metal driving down the road fundamentally. They didn't have an extensive view into the impact of what was happening on the pedestrian and cyclist side of things. Working with our clients, we helped pipe that data through to the DFT, initially in the reports that we pulled together, and now through our API, so that central government have got access to that sort of national view of what is happening across road networks, including the pavements, including the cycle lanes.
Interesting stuff. Okay, thank you for that, Peter. I'm going to come to you next, Bahar. I'm just wondering, again, I'll put the same challenge to you. Is the work of the Transport Technology Forum and its members relevant to you? Or maybe you could say something about its relevance in other markets. I know you've done a lot of work in Denmark, for example.
Sure. I think one of the things that I would like to also to respond to your question about that technology is more about cars, I think it's because the vision we had that we didn't think of people as mobilists. They are not just drivers or travelers as such. So if you start thinking people are mobilists and they need to go from A to B with different combinations, then it becomes more linked also with what Karla was trying to say as a combo. I think one of the biggest issues is that a lot of people think also that any technology we implemented on the road infrastructure is primarily to help congestion for the cars. It's for safety of the cars, and kind of like overlook this category of road users, which are pedestrians, cyclists, and other mobilists that I don't know, even like horse drivers and so on could be also kind of that. So I think one of the issues is quite actually the understanding of the also people about what is behind, because usually you don't see these technologies as something visible. You see a bridge when they build it, but you don't see a lot of intelligent transport solutions, sensors, data when you install them. So it's quite hard to also communicate the impact to the public unless it's obvious to them. And by obvious, I mean here it's that if you want to promote any behavior, any changes, it has to be very safe, comfortable, and the benefit should be extremely understandable for the public. So when you make a bridge, you save their time by 10 minutes or 15 minutes to go from A to B. It's checked, it's safer, it's better, it's easier and faster. And I think this is the way that we are trying also to sort of use the technology to meet these requirements. As Peter mentioned, a lot of time the technology was for the sake of technology or high-level planning and so on, but not for the user. But nowadays, with the existing solutions we have, let's say connected and cooperative intelligent transport solutions, which I can also give a little bit extra information when the infrastructure really talks to the cars and cyclists and pedestrian and so on. So then it's about people's need rather than what we wanted before, that the technology becomes smarter because we want to have this way of transport management or traffic management and so on. So I think it's getting more and more towards human-based design, human needs addressing design, rather than just like a high-level transport planning and transport management that we want to have this much less congestion or delay in this corridor, so we do this. Here we are trying to really, really integrate people's needs by means of detection technologies, by means of better data, and also more adaptive or responsive solution. Again, I emphasize on this that it is about a combination. When you go out of your home, you might be a truck driver for some hours, and then you are a cyclist or you are a bus passenger afterwards. So you have to have a solution which kind of like smoothly switch between these for you. And I can come to that later when we go.
Sure. I mean, I think it's something, I put my hands up to this. People will know that I used to work at the transport department, and we do tend to get rather hung up on the mode buses, we think about buses over here, we think about cars over there, we think about walking over here. And it's extremely hard to stitch together a perspective that takes the genuine, absolute end-to-end, this is where you leave your front door and this is where you arrive at your destination, to take all of that into account. But I was absolutely intrigued there. So somebody who certainly in, I'm going to call it the before, did a lot of walking, very rarely drove in London. I've walked many, many miles, and I found the mapping services that you can access on a smartphone, plug your earphones in, you can be listening to a talking book, you then get directions, you don't have to think too much. It's all great, but do I really want the infrastructure to talk to me? Is that a real thing? It's one of the things you said, but does it happen?
I can give you a concrete example. Like, one of the things that when we want to promote cycling and active travel is that you make it very safe and comfortable. Acceleration and deceleration, stopping and going behavior is really, really one of the disadvantages of cyclists, especially if you look at it as a means of a family transport. For instance, if you have kids on board and you want to use your bike for delivering your kids to kindergarten and back. So if you can minimize the number of stops per intersection you have, it's a much a smoother sort of speed profile or travel profile for that person. And also it's much safer because every time they stop and go, there is a risk of failing, hitting someone hitting them, and so on. Whereas if we can harmonize the speed for many of the cyclists, then it's much safer as a community when they're cycling. And for doing that, one of the, for instance, exact technology solutions is that we call it green wave, or you can say sort of CITS again, cooperative intelligent transportation. And it's when you try to, by some sort of many different means, it could be through apps like sending you messages and saying slow down, or the maximum speed is this if you continue, or it could be by some blinking LEDs on the road surface that you tell them you have 15 seconds to pass, so you don't have to do jerky cycling, or you can adapt your speed towards the time you have to cross. And also it avoids a lot of red crossing and things like that could be quite dangerous. So when I mean technology talking to people is very simply by some blinking lights telling them that if you cycle like fast, you can get to the green. If not, just you get prepared for, okay, I have to stop here and I don't have to like run and then get to a red light and, create a risk for myself and kids. So this is one of the examples. Or when I saw, like, when I mean by infrastructure talking, frost and we are in the winter season. So if you know that which corridors are more slippery at the moment, or even the sort of the salting machines are in which corridors, so you can avoid those corridors. Or if this corridor is very polluted for your kids, maybe you want to have a more cleaner corridor or greener corridor that you can take your route a bit longer but more healthier for or comfortable, and that's kind of possible with all the data we have and also the way of communicating through variable message signs or apps and so on.
Everyone on this call will know what Glossa is, but I've always tended to think of Glossa as being something for actually predominantly for trucks, but Glossa for cycling. That does make sense. I can see that. So, okay, Karla, your turn. Is it really relevant? Where does transport technology fit into promoting active travel rather than promoting the efficient economic use of our networks and helping us all get around much faster?
I think it's really relevant, and I can tell already that I need to have a conversation with Bahar because we've got a lot of common themes here in our thought pattern. So depending on what the challenges are that we find from the combo travel work and what is stopping people from doing it, I suspect that some of the biggest challenges will be around safety and people's perception of what is safe, and also the pollution rates and that kind of thing. It's that kind of information people want, so they've got that reassurance. So what is going to reassure cyclists, for example, or as Bahar said, people with children, what is going to reassure them that that particular route is safe, that the pollution levels are low, that there's no particular roadworks, that the quality of the route is good. So it's all of that kind of information that we can get through the TTF, really, through organisations within the TTF to try and build that technology, those innovations, to get that reassurance, so more and more people feel that they've got everything they need to be able to be more to travel more actively.
But one of the things that I pick up from what you were saying earlier on those sort of the chaining together of different modes over a trip, I live in a town. In the town, there's a lot of motor traffic, so I might not feel terribly safe out there on a bicycle in amongst the heavy traffic. It's not necessarily moving that quickly, but there's quite a bit of it. If I move out of town, which is not far away, I'm into relatively narrow roads, where my observation is many people drive as if they're going down a dead straight road and they can see everything, and they're actually going down a twisty road and they can't see round corners, but they're still going too fast. That's one of the things that really puts me off. Is that something where there could be a technology that perhaps helped on both sides of that equation and helped get people to drive a bit more responsibly and make me feel a bit safer if I ventured out on my bike?
Absolutely, and technology around that will come from information to the drivers as well as the cyclists. So information to the drivers so that they know that there is a cyclist or an obstruction of some kind in the road going forward. But also, it would be really nice to sort of be able to see for cyclists which is the safest route for them. So they can say, well, I want to go down a road that's not particularly busy, but also not that's particularly twisty, which is my alternative route. And there could be ways around that. Or it could be that they cycle to the nearest bus stop, for example, then use a bus around the twisty or the congested bit, get off the bus with their bike, which is quite key, and then cycle the rest of the way when they feel safe. So they use public transport to get them past that area that makes them feel unsafe. So there would be quite a lot of areas where you could pull technology into that challenge, I think.
In visiting Seattle, back when we were allowed to do such things, I noticed that all of the buses in Seattle had bicycle carrying racks on the front. I think the ability to get on the bus in this country with anything other than a folding bicycle is something of a challenge. So that's something to feed into the mix, that it's not just when we talk about the technology. I think sometimes I've often said, we all know what technology is. It's things with little blue lights on. It used to be little red lights when I was young. Now it's little blue lights, but it isn't necessarily. Innovation isn't just about things that are powered electrically. Now, Bahar's going to come in, and then I'm going to put a question from my dear friend from the mosh pit. So, Bahar first, and then we're going to pick up on Glenn Lyon's question.
In continuation to what you mentioned about Seattle and the buses, also in Denmark, for instance, they have designed a specific type of, it's not a light rail and it's not a metro, it's kind of a combination mode. At some places it's over surface and then it goes into tunnel somewhere. But they have made a specific space extremely comfortable to bring your bike on, sit next to your bike, and you can park bikes in the racks and then also have your seat. And then when you get to your station, you can take off. And then this is the way that a lot of people are able to cycle like 15 to 30 kilometers just to do their last mile, take the train and come to the city, or go out and then do their last mile. So I think you are absolutely right. It's not all about the data that we have and things that are blinking and so on. Sometimes a smart design of a fleet, a bus fleet or a train fleet and so on really, really helps, because then people see it as a natural way. It's part of the day-to-day travel. So it should be extremely simple and comfortable so that people make it their own. And also in relation to what you were mentioning about that road and the experience of being unsafe, I think if those people who are driving fast also feel themselves sometimes as a part of the cyclist community, trying it out, campaigning, putting things up, and so I think they might also be having a better sort of feeling about driving safer while there's a mixed road environment for them and cyclists.
I couldn't agree more. I think the two things that I say to people about driving on, we think of rural roads, but any single carriageway road is, round the next corner, think about this, coming towards you at high speed could be a delivery driver who's in a hurry, a tractor driver who's in a hurry, or one of your kids on a bicycle, and you don't want to hit any of them, so proceed accordingly. Now I want to pick up Glenn's point here, which I did hear from one of you earlier on, which is technology for the sake of it. We can get a bit carried away, can't we? I think I had the great joy of sitting in never going to be able to buy one, but it did have the great joy of sitting in a Range Rover, a modern Range Rover. It's a country house from the outside, and it's the cockpit of a fighter jet on the inside. There's all sorts of functionality which I'm quite sure the person who let me sit there will never work out how to use. Are we in danger, maybe, of overladening ourselves with technology here? Are we perhaps getting away from the pure simplicity, the bicycle, one of the simplest machines that we've got, one of the most efficient? What on earth do we need technology for when what we really need is a couple of fairly strong legs and a decent pair of lungs? What would we say to that? Peter, you have a go at that one first.
I think that there always needs to be a purpose for the technology if you're going to put it in. So if there is a cycle lane that is benign, straight, not got traffic crossing it, putting technology on that cycle lane is probably not going to add a huge amount of value to it. So yeah, I'd agree. Don't. Always sort of go in thinking, well, what is the sort of premise and the purpose here? So if there is an unsafe junction, that could maybe benefit from some technology to work out why it's unsafe and to monitor the degradation of the performance of that junction or the improvement if there's an intervention. If you're planning on investing millions of pounds in building a new cycleway, it would be worth understanding that that is going to be used and what the impacts of that would be before you invest that money to make sure you don't waste the money. So there's definite sort of cases where there are really good examples why the technology is needed. But as I say, equally, there will be sites where covering the road in technology is maybe less necessary. In terms of the actual riders and the walkers themselves, I think you'll get a range of users who want different things. Some riders will like a connected bike that will ring the emergency services if they have a crash, because that will make them feel safer. Some riders like the data because it helps them do the exercise. It's sort of the Strava type product where they want to see them beating the top speed score or whatever it might be. Others will actively not want that sort of data to be gathered. And so the roads and the junctions need to be able to accommodate for the not connected as well as the connected in that sort of scenario.
Absolutely, I get that. And Karla, I wonder if you'd agree with the point Joel Dudworth has made, that when we're thinking about this, if you think about the whole system, then the technology that enables information to go to that car driver I was talking about earlier, car or van or whatever vehicle, and got them to slow down, is the reason why we've made the road safer for other people using the road. It doesn't have to be a connection to the cyclist.
I think the onus is on, there's going to be both sides of it, really. So there is obviously some common sense that's got to be applied by the cyclist or the walker, but definitely that technology, if you can imagine that you're going to have a flashing light or something to say, look out, something's on the road ahead of you. You'd have to be pretty stupid to ignore it, really, considering, like you were saying, it could be your child, it could be... nobody's going to want to do that. Nobody wants to go out and purposely knock somebody over. They happen as an accident. So how can we use that technology to prevent those accidents from happening? So I think it's definitely something that we've got to keep developing and fine-tuning as well. As we get used to something, we tend to start ignoring it. So we've got to keep upping our game all the time so we don't just become complacent.
Okay, that's a fair point.
We
call them very deliberately call them crashes, not accidents, because accident sounds like something it just happened. And certainly had driving in recent weeks a few near misses where people have definitely been thinking that right of way is a discretionary judgment on their part, and their trip is definitely more important than mine, and that's whether I've been cycling, walking or driving. So everyone behaving a bit more responsibly would be good. I want to switch the angle that we're taking now. So we've been talking about what technology can do to help implement the government's desire to see more of us travelling actively. But I'm very conscious here for the TTF audience, here's the question, is there a commercial opportunity here the members of the TTF, perhaps on the private sector side, who are developing this technology, developing ideas, is there a growing market? We certainly see in our own Prime Minister in this country putting really large sums of money on the table, which traditionally would all have gone on perhaps secure bicycle racks and painting lines on the carriageway, but maybe some of that money should be going into more technological solutions. Bahar, I'm going to come to you on this one, because I'd be interested not just for this country, but is this something that Arup are seeing as a commercial opportunity on the world stage?
I certainly believe so, because especially due to the pandemic, we've experienced something that we never experienced before. So we were promoting a lot of people to use public transport as the first means, and then depending on the topology of your city, the infrastructure you were also trying to look at the active travel. But due to the space limitation and the contagious situation of the corona that I think everybody is well aware of, then suddenly we faced a situation that public transport maybe for current situation is not what we are highly promoting, because it could be dangerous, it could be this and that for people. So what happened here is that there was a switch again to the policy, as you mentioned. So we were trying to sort of promote cycling by more static situation while we were promoting other modes such as public transport. But then this scenario changing, or this flip over of the whole thing we faced, created a lot of focus on new possibilities for commercialization of active travel as a whole. It could be scooters, it could be cycling, and many other things that I don't even know what could be the next type of vehicle or something that would be helping with active travel. So as Arup, yes, we are seeing also not only as an integrated part of transportation planning of the whole clients we have, we are really looking into more how we can promote active travel and save energy, how we can promote active travel and do a sort of better dynamic urban space. We have a space, can we use it more dynamically, different times of the day, so on, so that you don't have to build more and create more CO2 emission while you're still addressing, and maybe again after hopefully some time that this situation is back to normal or semi-normal or so we are able to adjust again the needs coming in. So we don't just sort of switch everything 100% and then go back to something, and then in 6 months we need something else too. So it's more like thinking adaptive and sort of ensuring that we can actually take this window, use it very helpful, and of course if we can create some commercial opportunities for society, why not? There is a great possibility, but at the same time we're looking at other criteria: sustainability, adaptability, and responsiveness of what we are doing for more unknown situations that we might face or not in the future.
Okay, I'm going to come to Karla next, because presumably it's part of the mission of Innovate UK, and it's definitely part of the mission of BEIS to be promoting the industrial and commercial interests, fostering our economic success in this country, both in terms of the technology we can develop for deployment in this country, but also around the world. Is that something that you're seeing from where you sit? Do you think companies are seeing an opportunity? Is there more that we could do to make them aware of an opportunity, as the government, our government and other governments are pumping money into the active travel world?
Oh, definitely. And I think one of the key things here is local government as well as central government. So the connections with local government. So, I mean, anyone who knows me knows that I'm always pushing the concept of collaboration. So working with businesses as well as working with local authorities, for example. And I think that is going to be really key here. So Peter will be able to talk to the benefits of working with local authorities as an SME, how you can really get to the nub of what the problem is, so that you can find a bespoke solution for that particular area. And that's when you're going to start getting more procurement, etc., and developing that commercial opportunity. So I think collaboration is going to be the key to finding what those commercial opportunities are.
And do you think, so really within if I can put it this way, the Transport Technology Forum family, bringing together the client, local authorities, highway authorities, and the provider technology companies, it's what we're here for. It's part of our mission. Is there more we could be doing on that front, perhaps to show that the active travel world is of itself something that they should be jointly thinking about, rather than thinking, perhaps even maybe dismissing us as all about traffic signals?
It's a good question, and I think probably we would need to go out to the members to try and get a bit more information as to what the blockages are there and how we could support. So I don't think these days it's just a case of knowing who to speak to. I think it's more a case of knowing who's got a specific challenge, because Liverpool will have a different challenge to Manchester, which will have a different challenge to, each different region, doesn't matter how close they are, will have slightly different challenges. So I think it's probably more about getting that kind of information, but it's definitely something we could get more in touch with the members about.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, I'm going to come to Peter next. I will then, after we've spoken, Peter, I'm going to pick up a question we've just had in from Mark Roxburgh. But Peter, we talked earlier about junction design, and one of the things that I don't think we've got a good answer to be in this country is not just the major junctions, but motor vehicles turning left across segregated lanes, either for bus and cycle or just for cycle. I think we've got some design challenges there. Is that one of the areas where technology and data could help us be coming up with better designs? And have you been party to getting some better design actually out there on the ground?
So yeah, there are lots of different angles that we could answer that particular question in. I think as a starting point, I think one of the frustrations that a lot of cyclists have about the historic layout of cycle lanes in this country tends to be that the left turning traffic's quite often given right of way over that cycle lane. And that can be quite frustrating. And if you look at some of the data that we've gathered on sites with segregated cycleways, you get quite a high proportion of cyclists choosing to cycle in the main flow of traffic to keep that right of way. So straight away there, you've got a sort of design example and then data showing the unintended consequence of that decision. Clearly, just changing the right of way round does then create new problems, because you've then got the traffic having to then work out how it's going to give way to that oncoming sort of cycle flow that might be to the left of them and potentially blocking their route off that main road. We've seen recently a number of designs of roundabouts, I think you mentioned earlier, in Cambridge, in Manchester, that are following the Dutch style design that is effectively there giving priority to the cyclists, both coming onto and off a gyratory, so that the priority is very much given to the cyclists, and it will just become hopefully second nature to the cars driving through those areas in terms of looking out for the cyclists. I think there's still analysis to be done to see what the, I wouldn't call it unintended consequence, because maybe one of the intended consequences is to slow the traffic down as well. If you're in a signalized world, where you have sort of the vehicles being and the cyclists being controlled in terms of whether they are stopping or not, suddenly the ability for you to be intelligent with the way that you control that traffic flow improves massively. So you can have a green light that is different for the cyclists compared to the cars, for example. And if you're clever about it, and if you've got the data about knowing where the vehicles are within that junction, you can vary the amount of time extra you're giving to the cyclists depending on how fast they cycle away. So you don't need to give a penalty to the vehicles all of the time. If your cyclist has cleared the junction very quickly, you can shorten that penalty in terms of being given the green slightly later. So there are lots of opportunities, both, as I say, on the understanding actually the interaction side of things, but also then using technology to try and solve some of those problems.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, I mean, I do wonder again whether we think about the design issue rather too tightly, that if we're running a bus or a cycle lane along a road, we think, well, we'll break the lane where there's a left turning. Vehicles are going to be turning across. The onus is then on the bus driver or the cyclist to look out for the traffic turning across and stop. And maybe we just need to be thinking more creatively about whether a turn across like that is permissible, or whether perhaps we need to do, as has happened on many trunk roads, limit the number of turnings and go to a more one-way system, which again might make a car trip a bit longer, but might make it safer for all of us. But one of the things, certainly one of the bugbears I've got in the world of looking after our highways, is what we'll bracket loosely under the heading of maintenance. It's our friend the pothole, but it's also our friend the street works, the utility works, and the quality of reinstatement. And what Mark Roxburgh is asking us is, well, can technology help us there in improving the maintenance? I would say improving the quality of facilities for active modes. I have cycled down the road I live on. It is a deeply unpleasant experience. The road I live on has many similarities with, as far as I can tell, the surface of the moon. So is there something technology can be doing there? And also on things like overgrowing vegetation, some of the bugbears, the paper cuts of local highway authority life, the stuff they used to give to the most junior guy in the room. And perhaps they don't have the most junior guy in the room anymore. And so the vegetation is covering up the signs. The surface of the road is unpleasant to walk on. It's unpleasant to cycle on. Is there a role for technology there? And then I'm going to come to Bahar to ask whether that's something that's also an issue elsewhere. So Karla first. Oh, sorry. Yeah,
No,
Karla,
no.
you go for Karla first. Then I'm going to come to Bahar.
Okay, so Mark, definitely technology can help here, and the using geospatial data to solve transport challenges competition that I've recently run with the Geospatial Commission, we saw some fantastic projects in there, and some of them were for exactly this issue, for looking at vegetation. The one that springs to mind was definitely rail related, but how we can prevent leaves on lines, for example, and using geospatial data and sensor technology to pick those kind of issues up. So taking those kind of technologies onto a road surface that is like the surface of the moon. I don't know where you live, Steve, but it sounds a bit ropey. But if you're thinking about some of the road surfaces, if we can use sensor technology to pick those areas up, that could be linked to the local authority, and then again technologies to help fill potholes quicker. I mean, we've seen all sorts of things like that, and we definitely saw some great projects in that kind of ilk in the Highways England competition in the maintenance theme. So there are a lot of organisations out there who are really thinking about some of these challenges, and I think there's a lot more to see.
Thank you. Well, I live on a road that was built in 1958 and has subsequently been trenched for gas, electricity, and most recently for cable. And it's not pretty. Let's just say it's not pretty, and it's not just not pretty because I live here. But what's your thought then, internationally?
I think you touched upon a very, very common experience in a lot of cities all around. Like we have quite a big issue in terms of planning the maintenance, and that's very, very known problem, and it doesn't require a lot of sophisticated technology, to be honest, but it has to sort of kind of a coordination platform that could make sure that as you mentioned, the electricity company, the cabling, the water company, and so on, can actually sort of better coordinate it. I've personally seen a lot of complaints and things from citizens before when I was working for the city, that 1 month the road is closed because of one issue, next day is from another issue, and as soon as the asphalt is nice and the pavement becomes good, then somebody else comes and do something else. And I know in some of the European cities, actually, they've really tried to, with small and simple initiatives, create platforms that this permission for blocking the roads or permission for building things becomes more integrated. And just like, say, if there's two contractors within a short time frame have to do something, they have to coordinate. And then there are messages to the city authority and so on that they are on site or not. And then that message can be published to the cyclists and say, this road for next 3 days is kind of like, we can't say exactly where they're working, but this stretch is problematic. But when it comes in terms of the pavement, I think there is also other types of technology that I've seen in material science and pavement and road surface quite a bit, that they call it regenerative asphalt and things like this, that they can actually itself detect the cracks and things like that and improve it. And also certainly one of the things which is about the pothole detection, like image processing, using of drones in a faster way to detect where are the exact problems, or using the bicycle information through the apps to see where are the sort of like the jerky situations happening, where are the potholes or potential potholes, and then coordinate that really according to the city needs and people needs, rather than just saying, okay, we leave this street in this condition for while until we detect it. So a lot of things can be fixed when they are happening, instead of they become a big crack or something like that. And potentially in this area, I think one of the sensors that are getting really used is the ones that can detect the surface quality, and also these material ones that I think a lot of work I've seen by road authorities are doing test bits and so on to see which asphalts are more CO2 friendly and also regenerative, that avoids a lot of maintenance.
I think we've all been waiting for the self-healing road for quite a while
Indeed.
now, and it's been talked about, certainly in highway circles, for a long time. But the idea that through the use of technology in the broadest sense and through monitoring data, highway authorities could be proactive rather than reactive. Is that something, Karla, that's come through the Innovate world? Are people actually trying to get ahead of the game here?
Oh, definitely. And I know that the satellite applications catapult are doing this with bridges, for example. But how can we become an issue? Just listening to what Bahar was saying there, that she said that where is there a potential pothole? That's so important that we pick that kind of thing up before it becomes an issue. And that's where some of this sensor technology is going to be really important, to pick up which areas have just changed slightly, which could then lead to a pothole appearing or a crack appearing in a bridge, or all of those different potential dramas. Then if we can flip it on its head and be a little bit more in advance, and that would be really useful.
Yeah, I think the idea of predictive maintenance programs rather than reactive is certainly one that I've been in conversation with people running highway authorities, and that's where they'd like to get to. But the next question I'm going to move us on to is, again, a different angle. We've talked about highway authorities being customers for technology, getting on and fixing things, designing junctions. They're going to be really cash strapped, looking ahead for all of the terrible things that have happened since last March. Money is going to be very tight. Is there a role for technology? Is there a role for TTF members? Not just to be thinking, well, there's fees to be earned here, but there's fees to be earned here by saving you money. And I'm thinking, I'm going to come to you first here, Peter, because I think, is there a pitch from companies like yours where you could be saying to local highway authorities, there's a modest spend for a big save to be had here? Can we be helping them get their job done, even though they're cash strapped?
So I think in terms of saving money, the biggest savings that we can offer are around not making big infrastructure mistakes fundamentally. I think we've seen a number of schemes recently that were put in quickly and then political pressure has caused them to be taken back out again, whereas others where there's been good quality data around the scheme before, during and after have survived the vocal minority campaign against them because there's been a good proof point that they've been used. So that's sort of one area where, I say, from our own experience, we can really point to value that has been saved directly to our clients. I guess there's sort of two other angles on this that I will sort of pose a question on potentially, if you don't mind. So the first one is we've got obviously with things like the climate crisis, but also productivity in the UK still sort of lagging behind some of our international competitors. There's a huge amount of value to the economy and value to society of making our transport systems better. So there is an argument that while local authorities might be cash strapped, there is going to be a return to the economy and therefore a return on investment from central government funding to invest in these things and make it better. And if you can demonstrate that sort of wider value to the wider society, it's still something that's worth government investing in. if you sort of look at the concept of smart city and smart transportation, there are efforts around the rest of the world to try and monetize that through the private sector. I would ask us to sort of politically think long and hard before pushing too hard in that direction, because if our access to mobility and transport is predicated on giving up data for advertising or for surveillance or being given priority based on the highest bidder, is that actually the direction that we want to go in? So talking personally rather than necessarily as a company, I would advocate for looking at the return on investment to society to be the decision on funding making, rather than necessarily searching for that private sector revenue stream that might lead us away from the social optima.
I think you've got a good point there. However, I think we've spent quite a while in this country in particular in developing our investment cases off the back of our ability to get between places ever faster. And I think we may be in the business of turning that particular tanker around. But Bahar, I want to come to you again, because you've got this perspective from other places, and particularly Denmark, which is often held up to us as a country that does this better. Do they have a different way of thinking about the value for money? Do they have more money? Is it the case that the Danish higher authorities are just flush with cash and it doesn't really matter so much to them?
I think that's hard for me to say if they have more money. Certainly taxes are quite high, that I can say as a citizen myself. But one thing that I think is you also, I mean, through the talk, I think we get to it, is that it's something that I think the return in investment is, of course, an instrument for any government to be able to continue the progress, continue the development and expansion. And we can't just focus on active travel and sort of disregard the other parts, because in 6 months or so, we are in a different situation and we have to be ready and adapt to that. And in 10 years and so on when we think longer. So I think that's definitely something that is a little bit hard for me to give a complete answer. But one thing that in terms of Denmark being quite good, or one of the leadings in terms of the promoting the active travel, I think it's quite obvious. I will encourage the people who are listening is that just to search the word bicyclist, and then in English, and then search it in Danish, which will be cyclist, or just say cyclist if you just type. And then in Google, you will see the images. You will see the difference of how we are thinking in Denmark about cyclists and how other internationally are thinking. When you search bicyclist in English, you will only see sporty people cycling, fast bikes, and so on. But when you search the word in Danish, cyklist, then you will see a lot of families with bike, elderlies with bikes, children with bike. So you will see this cohesion, this sort of inclusiveness. Just by saying this, so you can say that what they've done, which I think has contributed extremely into this potential for having a lot of active travel as one natural way of traveling. It's not like you think when you go out of your house, what I have to do. You just take your bike, because usually within 5 to 7 kilometers in Copenhagen is the fastest mode, and it's the cheapest, of course. And it gives you quite flexibility, because you don't have to think about what is the next station, or when I get off here, am I on time? You sort of adapt yourself to it. So I think this is one thing that it comes so naturally into the urban planning, into your day-to-day needs, that you just get it so natural. When you wake up, you say, okay, I have to deliver this, I have to do that. In shopping, it's already integrated. In kindergartens, parking is already integrated. So I think that's one of the key areas that I think Danes have been quite successful in promoting cycling as one active and really, I think, one of the biggest modes of transport in Copenhagen. Is about 50% of modal split is on bikes to work and education. So we had congestion problems on bike paths. Similar to cars, but I mean for bikes, that how we can help them to sort of get the flow right for them and avoid the delays and so on. So I think this is something that I would just say to think it as an integrated part more.
I think that's a really good point, and it actually echoes something that Sukhvinder in the chat has raised here. It certainly lays to rest the myth that the reason we don't cycle in this country is because of the rain, because I'm given to understand, Bahar, that it does rain in Denmark occasionally.
Rain and wind, and I think there is no matter which direction you cycle, the wind is against you most times. I don't know why.
It certainly feels that way to me whenever I've cycled in this country. Everything anyway. I'm going to move on. I'm going to take a last thought from you, and actually, it is on the point that Bahar you're raising and that Sukhvinder is raising, which is we've started this conversation thinking about how Transport Technology Forum members can be getting involved in promoting active travel. Should we be taking a further step back from that and not be focusing so much on travel and think more about how we can create better places to live? Thinking about our lifestyles, thinking about the places where we live, and relegate travel back to being the derived demand. Perhaps thinking about the Hidalgo model for Paris, the 15-minute city. Do we need to broaden our horizon, with whether it's a step back, whether it's broaden our horizon, not just be thinking about transport, but be thinking about the places where we live? Karla, let me come to you first on that one.
I think that probably horizons were broadened for us last year, really, which was one of the reasons we saw so many more people on their bikes, and people saw the benefits of, of less traffic and being able to cycle. And a lot of people kind of thought then, I didn't realise how much I enjoyed doing this, for example. And so I think as a result, one of the very few benefits of COVID is the active travel revolution, and that it has broadened our horizons for us. So I think the more we can do that, and the more people, certainly the walking I'm doing every day, that I'm finding areas in my local area I didn't even know existed. So the more we can do that and appreciate our local areas, I think the better.
Thank you. Peter.
Peter. I said there's absolutely no doubt that people's travel behaviours have changed over the last not quite 12 months, but we're getting there, which I think will, assuming that it sticks to some extent with this sort of more home working, it will change the way that we view the spaces around us and where we want to go and where we want to get to. I don't think we'll see a reduction in the total number of trips, but we might see a change in sort of the philosophy that people are taking to those trips. If you're sort of commuting every day, you are really focused on getting from A to B as fast as possible, whereas if it is a pleasure trip, speed maybe is less of an importance. Just having sort of had a peek before this webinar at some of the data from last year from a car perspective, though, I think in the busiest week, which was just before the November lockdown since COVID started, the number of cars on the road had got back up to pretty much where it was before. And in that scenario, then I would sort of question whether that sort of really fundamental long-term shift is actually going to remove the need to think about people getting from A to B, as well as thinking about the quality of going from A to B.
Good point. Okay, yes, it was certainly the case that in certain places, at least, the traffic had come back, but by no means everywhere, which is one of those data questions technology can help us with. So a last thought from you, Bahar, on this as well. Do we need to think more about place and less about travel?
I think that's actually a very good angle to start really rethinking. I don't have an exact answer, but I think certainly due to pandemic, we realize how our communities are important, and also how our identity as a traveler is important, because we've contributed to a lot of air pollution, which could have contributed to a lot of things that we are facing these days in terms of climate change and so on, which definitely COVID might be one of the just examples of the impact. But I think for me, I think one of the certain changes that we have to, as industry and consultants and urban planners, think is that people needs should be addressed in a best possible way. And walking in a safe community, being able to cycle to your school, to your supermarkets, being able to get access to what you need in the easiest and safest way for many different scenarios should be prioritized. Because a lot of cities in Europe were designed that you have a big mall, driving 15 minutes there, get all your needs, come back home. But what if we can't drive any longer because of another thing? And this is something that I think we really need to rethink by learning from COVID experience and see what we can benefit further by reducing just going to work, by being able to work from home more often. Can we really contribute to reduce these impacts of negative environmental impact of our traveling?
Okay. So by my clock on my laptop, we're coming to the end of this particular fireside chat. It's going to be time to put a properly air-dried log on the fire if you're going to have a fire, but probably we've all got heat pumps, haven't we? I'm just going to wrap up there. I'm going to say a big thank you to the panel, to Bahar, Karla and Peter. I think that's been a really interesting conversation, interesting exchange of views. So I think that, and I'd also like to thank the people who posted questions. I hope we've done justice to the views that you brought through. One of the things that we will be doing, we'll be putting a recording of this session up. So if you have been with us and you thought that was interesting, please do tell your professional friends and colleagues, perhaps to click on the link and have a look at what we're getting up to. And also have a think about any other topic or blog post or subject that you might like us to tackle, either in a fireside chat or more generally in the material that we post. But in the meantime, I'm just going to sign off with the sign off that we're all using now, which is, of course, stay safe. So thank you for being with us. Stay safe, everyone. And that's all for now.